This looks a bit like what my hair looks like when it gets stuck in the drain. Is that really bad? Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending when you're watching. Dora here with episode 5, I believe, of the Crochet Studio Sessions. So this week I was really hoping to have my Fluff It sweater pattern launched and out and ready for the world, but I haven't. The pattern itself is just about ready, but if you saw last week, I was saying I wanted to do a few tweaks on this, which was the original sample I made. I did think I'd put it on just so you could get an idea of what it looks like. So I sort of made the tweaks, but I'm still working on the new samples. So generally I'm pretty pleased with this sample. Just give you, sorry my chair is so loud by the way. So to give you an idea of what it looks like, it's got kind of plenty of space but isn't massively oversized. It is worked from side to side. I've just given this a very gentle steam block. Still debating whether to soak it or not. The only tweaks I've really made is I've changed the shoulder. There's some shoulder shaping, not a lot, but I've slightly adjusted that so the slant is a bit closer into the neck. So it sits on this section. I've talked a lot about shoulder shaping recently, so I think it's been in my mind and I really wanted to get it right on this. You can see it's sort of like a gentle V-neck, not quite V, bit V, not quite round. It would be fairly easy to round that off if you prefer to not have a V. So obviously being me, I'm not just making one new sample but two, because I had a bit of a brain fart moment with my yarn amounts. This yarn it's from Mammy and Florrie, who's an indie dyer based in the UK up north, and it is a 4-ply, oh gosh, Surrey alpaca. I think it's Surrey alpaca, not mohair. Hold that thought because I'm going to get the pattern. It was on the sofa where I was doing my making. So, pattern here. So this is, yes, it's fingering weight Surrey alpaca. Now, the new samples I want to do, because often with these sort of fluffy yarns, you tend to get a lace weight more commonly than you do a fingering weight or 4-ply. So I wanted to make samples in something that was kind of really readily available. So, sorry, I always have to cross my legs when I'm sitting on this chair. Yeah, so my samples, I wanted to make sure there was something visual that had widely available yarns. So I've been using lace weight mohair. Now, I made a bit of a swatch. Well, I've got 2 swatches here from some lace weight that I had in stash. One is these cones, which I got in a charity shop a long time ago, but it's a like 78% or 72% kid mohair and the rest nylon. This one, which I think is either yarn, I think this one might be a drops actually, but this is kid mohair with silk. So I made a couple of samples because I wasn't sure what colour to do, because I've got this beautiful, this is Zakami Yarns mohair and silk. It's beautiful, super soft, and I've got I think 3 50-gram balls of that, and then I've got the stuff I did use, but I swatched with that this one with 2 strands held together, because generally your 2 strands of lace weight makes up the my brain just got distracted then because I was like, I did press record, didn't I? So apologies. 2 strands of lace weight tends to make up a sort of 4-ply weight. Obviously with this pattern I'm using a really big hook, so I'm using an 8mm hook with this, so you've got lots of space between the stitches, which is why it's so kind of lacy. So I actually really quite liked this undyed swatch, but I'm going to make a cardigan at some point with this stitch pattern. So I'm going to save this for the cardigan because I think that would look epic. I'm also going to hold it double with a non-mohair. I've got some lace weight alpaca, which I think would look amazing with that. So I then tried mixing the undyed with this pink. So that's these two. And I did like the kind of effect of the swatch, but I think because you've got this sort of rib here, these are all made with post stitches, I think you sort of lose some of the effect. I think it gets a bit lost. And part of what I liked about this sweater was this kind of vertical ribbing look that it comes with. I'm also, in one of the samples, I think I'm going to bring the sleeves in, so we've got a bit more of a cuff, so at least you have the option to then cinch it in. So what I ended up doing was using, and I'll show you where I'm at, these two yarns, which are, so they're not exactly the same, but they are the Grey Sheep company, and it's lace weight, it's called Fairway Yarns, and it's lace weight, it's again 72% mohair, 28% silk, and it's dyed by Fluff and Stuff, and it's called something like, yeah, Fairway yarn. I bought these at a yarn show, and this one is called Barbie, and this one had no label, and it's a very similar pink. It is just slightly lighter, and it's a semi-solid, and they've both got quite kind of the cores are quite sort of white, so doubled up I did swatch and check. I thought they look okay, and the colours are close enough to not be kind of jarring in the way that one was. So I haven't finished it, but I have done, now what I've done with this one, I have sized down. So I've gone, this is a small that I'm wearing, and there's quite a lot of positive ease in this sweater. So I've sized down and I've taken 6 stitches off the length, and my brain fart moment, because I had 2 balls. So this sweater, which used the 4-ply, this is less than 2 balls of yarn for this. So that's 2 100-gram skeins of the 4-ply. So it was about 160 grams, which the meterage is about, I can tell you, because when you're working with these fine yarns, the meterage is quite impressive. So I'm not going to tell you because it's not in this version of the pattern, it's on the electric one. But 160 yarns, 400 meters, so it's about 680 meters, something like that for a size small, which has about 15 to 20 centimeters positive ease. So it's nice and relaxed without being baggy. So I decided, partially because I started making a really short sleeve version, and then I realized these are 2 50-gram balls, so I only had 100 grams total. So I was like, that's not going to work, is it? So I frogged it and decided to make like a sleeveless tank top version. So I sized down and took 6 stitches, so about that much off the bottom, to make it a bit more cropped, because this one, I'm quite short in the upper body. So this one sort of falls, my hip bones are just here, so it falls just to the hips, the bottom of the waist. But I quite like a kind of more cropped top that sort of stops about there. So that's the aim with this one, and it'll be a little bit more fitted. And I'm debating doing like the little neck finishing with a contrast yarn, maybe even with this cream. Partly because I am playing a bit of yarn chicken. I should have just about enough as long as I keep my tension reliable. So this is the back panel. So you've got that little bit of shoulder shaping that goes up here. These are just my version of stitch markers. This is where the shoulder ends, and then got another one there. So this is the kind of neckline section. There's not a huge amount of difference in the neckline section with the small and the extra small. So this is the small, this will be the extra small. because they're quite chunky rows, there's not a huge amount of difference, and the neckline section is actually the same width, because obviously your neck width doesn't change at the same proportion as your chest width. So I've done the back, and this is where I'm at with the front. So you can see the shoulder shaping a bit more clearly, the way it kind of starts there and then will come up to the shoulder. And I'm about to start on this kind of V decrease section. So that's where I'm at with that. And actually, and this is the yarn I've got left, I think I'll be all right. I should be able to finish this afternoon. When I've finished recording, it works up so quick because, again, 8mm hook, which matches so beautifully. Yeah, it works up quite quick, and I've only got 40 stitches, well, 42 actually, at the full length. And because I'm now starting on this V-neck section, it's going to, you know, I don't have these stitches here that I have on the back panel. So that's where I'm at with that. So that is going to be the second sample. I wanted to make a short sleeve version because I'm quite digging short sleeves. I quite like this kind of not quite 3/4 length sleeve vibe that we got going, but I also think like a sleeve that goes here, and like I say, maybe with a bit of a cinch. So that'd be 1, 2, 3. So maybe like I'll take off 10 to 12 rows and just keep it quite short. So, as if by magic, literally about 10 minutes before I started recording, Postie showed up with a Wool Warehouse delivery that I haven't even opened. So I was obviously crocheting away with that bright pink yarn for my short sleeve version, and I went, hang on, these are 50-gram balls, so I'm not going to have enough yarn to do this. So I decided to order some more mohair yarn because I really want this short sleeve version. And I think I was a bit tired because I actually didn't order, well, the stuff I ordered, which that is for something else. Oh, that's nice. This, God, I'm so distractible. This is Wool Revival. This is a yarn that they basically pick the bits off the floor and turn it into yarn. This is West Yorkshire Spinners. So this was to see what it's like. Interesting. The colour's not right for what I want though. I'm looking for like a really nice chocolatey brown for autumn, dare I say it, thing. There's another little brown. That's much nicer actually. That's a Drops Charisma. And another brown. That's probably a little bit too dark, bit almost like reddy. Right, we don't need that. Right. So I bought a load more. Oh look, this is hilarious. That's the same as that. Yeah, so that is Drops Kid Silk. And I bought it in groups of 4. Forgetting, because it's been brain fart week, that actually these ones are only 25 grams. So if I want the same colour, I really need about 6 balls, not 4. I bought 4 balls of several colours. I think you can return it. But I think I can still mix and match with similar colours. That's what I'm hoping. These are some other... This looks a bit like what my hair looks like when it gets stuck in the drain. Is that really bad? It's nice, but that's just what it reminded me of. Or like those, remember those hair donuts you used to put in your hair and like roll your hair into it? Okay, I'll stop. Now, I've got some nice stuff in here. That is a nice colour. So either I'm going to double up again with 2 slightly different colours, because the other set of colours I've got, which I think might work. Okay. I think those will work quite nicely together. And then I don't have to wait for more yarn. Oof. Although I think that's beautiful on its own. What do we think? Shall I double up? Or shall I be patient and order more yarn in, I think, this colour? Although this is a bit, it's almost a little bit dusky. It's a beautiful colour. I think this one, isn't it? Tell me what you think in the comments. Help me make the decision, because as we've established, it's not something I'm very good at this week. So this is where I'm at with that. I think I'm going to go with this one, and I think I'm going to return this one. It's too purple. I have a slightly unnecessary aversion to purple. So any pinks that are a bit too purple. No, this is nice though. Okay, so this is going to become the short sleeve one. I think that'll look beautiful, like very fairy-like. This one is called, I think they might just have, colour 72. These are all from Wool Warehouse, which I really like for buying yarn. I'm pretty sure they ship internationally as well. So that is a very long way of telling you I haven't finished this yet, but it's going to be out by the next episode. Otherwise I'll have serious words to myself. Right, let's pop all this back. The other tip I quickly wanted to show you, because working with two balls held together can be a bit of a challenge. So I have, this is kind of where I'm at the moment. You can just roll the balls together, and I did think about doing that, but I decided against it. I use these, this is one of these little jelly bags, but I've used all sorts, like teapots or any sort of deep-sided bowl. So I just stick the yarn in here, and then I kind of sort of pull it out double, and let's not unravel it. And I kind of pull quite a bit out in advance, because I want to keep my tension really relaxed with this project, because it is a bigger hook. So you want to keep your working yarn really loose. So that's my other little tip about working double-stranded. When I made the Waste Not Want Not sweater, I was using, I think, 5 strands held together, and had a massive co-op bag for life with just all these yarns rolling around together. And it worked better than you would expect. Right, that's that. I'm going to pause, tidy up so I can see my desk, and then I've got some Ask Me Anything stuff to discuss. Okay, part 2. So I thought this was going to be really short this week, but I've already been chatting for 15 minutes. I have been having a look at my Ask Me Anything question box, which had loads in, so thank you for all the questions you've asked. I will put the link, I'll put it up there, and I'll also put it in the description below. So if you've got any questions about any crochet related stuff you want me to answer or address, please drop them in there. I will say that it's completely anonymous, so I have had some questions where people have asked for specific help or maybe a pattern or something, and I can't reply to you because all I see is the date that you asked the question, and I don't really look at that. I just look at it's just one text box, so I just look at that. And thank you to those that have just made really lovely comments. That massive thing for me, so I really appreciate it. So I've been having a look through at some of the questions, and I've picked out, and I've kind of highlighted a few that I want to talk about. And I can't do them all in one episode, or we'll be here till Christmas. But there was a bit of a theme that came up, and I thought I'd address that. And if you've made any garments or things that need to fit, you can probably guess that it's about gauge and sizing. So I'm going to read you this one question, which is quite representative of a lot of issues, I think. So it says, "Hello Dora, I hope you can help me with my gauge problem. Before I start an item, I make an extra large gauge swatch, make sure it matches the pattern's gauge. However, as I work, my stitches get progressively looser. By the end of the garment, for example, my stitches can be 20 to 50% or more larger than the gauge. I try to keep my tension the same, but the faster I work, the bigger my stitches. By the time I finish a project, especially garments, they're useless. Do you have any tips for keeping my tension the same?" Thank you for that question. One of the things that immediately came to mind, which is not at all related to crochet, but when I was studying at university back in the day, where you did exams where you actually wrote essays in the exams for answers, towards the end of the exam, my writing would get like, I'd start off like this, and then it would get more and more spread out as I went to write faster and faster, to the point where I'd have like 3 words on a line. It was ludicrous. I pity the examiners that had to read my essays. But I had this real visual reading that question of stitches getting bigger and bigger, especially if you go faster. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about these issues that are really common. And I think everybody says, make a gauge swatch, otherwise they won't fit. Now that is true, but there's more to it than that. For exactly the reason that Donna, who asked this question, and it is an older question, but there was many more like it, but this covered a lot. It can be really disheartening where you're like, but I did my swatch and it's still not right. And I really feel that pain. If you watch me process the lark sweater, process, develop, make, you'll see that I had some gauge issues with that. And one of the main reasons, well, not one of the main reasons, because the reason our gauge changes, let's start with that. The reason our gauge changes as we make a project depends on a lot of things. So stitch pattern, fibre, size. Let's start with size. So you work a 6-inch gauge swatch, which is what I tend to recommend, minimum of 5 inches. You know, if it's a smaller, if it's fingering weight, you can get away with 5 inches. If you've got the thicker the yarn, the bigger I think you should make your gauge swatch, because, you know, if you're working with super bulky and you only get 8 stitches in 10 centimetres, that's not very representative. I would do at least double that. So it's all very well making, say, a 6-inch gauge swatch, something like this. But as you get weight on it, so this is made side to side. So this is going to stretch more across the rows than it is downwards. So the stretch that I will see with this garment will make it wider and longer. Whoops. If it was worked rows top down or bottom up, it's likely to get longer in the body. And that's just gravity. Like, making a gauge swatch isn't gonna get rid of the laws of physics. It's not gonna account for the fact that there's gravity. There's a lady I've recently discovered on Instagram, recommended by another designer, and I will find a link to her video that she made, and she was actually discussing ease. So ease being the difference between the size of the garment and the size of your body. So this has positive ease because there is more, the garment is larger than my body. And she was talking about, now what words did she use? She used design ease, and it's completely gone out of my brain, the other type of ease, but it's kind of, let's call it functional ease. I should have rewatched her video. But the point she was making is you have the ease. So I will make a swatch, I'll do my maths, I'll say I want 10 centimetres of positive ease based on the gauge swatch. So I'll get that and say I've got my 10 centimetres that kind of comes out to here. But then you've got like the practical wear ease, where actually when you start to wear it, it will stretch because you're pulling the fabric around. So that's another element of ease. And the same principle applies with gauge. So you've got your gauge swatch gauge where I can make this, block it, lay it flat and measure it. That's great. But then as soon as I start pulling it out, your gauge numbers are going to get smaller and your stitches are going to get more stretched. This is an extreme example because it's such a loose, open stitch. So there's not as much stretch that way, which is the stitches, but you know, it goes quite far. So when I'm designing this, I need to kind of think, well, I kind of want to minimize that stretch because I don't want it to be out of shape. So the fact that I've got quite a lot of ease in the body means it's not stretched out of shape when I wear it. And also when you're using natural fibres, and they can, when you wash them, kind of, you can block them back mostly. It does depend on the stitch pattern. So that's the kind of size element. There's so many like little bits and bobs to this, and it takes a bit of experience to know what you get intuitive. And I think when I made some notes about what I wanted to talk about this, you've got the kind of tangible things that you can do and the slightly more intangible things. So the lady in that question said that her stitches were 20 to 50% larger. So if you know that, so always when you're making a gauge swatch, measure before and after you block, because then you know just with blocking how much your yarn stretches. You can then, and this is the bit where it's a bit intangible, but you can then kind of go, okay, well, if I'm wearing this, some people say put like little pegs on to weight it down, which is one way of doing it, but none of this is very scientific. But you can then say, okay, well, when I wear it, how much more does it actually stretch? This is why sometimes I make more than one sample, because I can do all the maths. And then I'm like, actually, by the time I've added cuffs, then that's actually the weight of a ribbed cuff, for example, might drag the sleeve down, or the same with a hem, or actually, you know, the arms are deeper, or maybe they're less deep than you expect. So maybe it doesn't stretch as much as you think it will. So the nature of the fabric is really important and makes a huge difference. If you did see the lark sweater, you'll see that that actually wasn't that stretchy. So the second sample I made ended up going the opposite to the first because I tightened my gauge up, but the amount of stretch was less. So this is just another reason why swatching is so important, and not just for the pure numbers. There's kind of an art to it. So we've got size and ease, we've got the stretch of your fabric, we've also got the construction that you're using. So I had another similar question, and it was about my waist knot want knot sweater, which I mentioned again, which is a bulky sweater because you're holding like 5 strands of yarn together, and it's like heavy, but it's lovely. I love it. And the question was about how that had held up. Now, this is where it comes to construction and the importance of structure in your garments. So seams. So if you're working a top down or bottom up garment that are in rows like this, then you know these rows are going to stretch down. So you're working like this, the weight of gravity might make your sweater do that. If you have a seam that's holding these row ends like that, you're going to really minimize the amount of stretch that you get. So it kind of mitigates against it. It's not going to take it off completely, but it's like, I don't know, it's like a beam in your roof kind of thing. You've got struts supporting it all the way around. Or not all the way around, it might just be at the sides. So top down yoke garments don't always have that, and that's why getting the yoke fit is good, because the yoke is the bit that everything else hangs from. So that's kind of, you want that to be right, and you also want it to not stretch too much. With modified drop, set-in, drop shoulder, you've got that structure with your shoulder seams, you know, which aren't always great. Sometimes, you know, you might like pull if you've got a really narrow one and quite a lot of weight. So you've got your shoulder seams, your side seams, but the other place that I find you can really fight against this stretch is your neckline. So having a solid neckline that's going to stay in shape. If you're on a cardigan, most of my cardigans now have in their kind of button band, whether you have buttons or not, I will use slip stitches because I find it really helps to hold that shape. And that's even if I've got side seams in. It just takes the pressure off the rest of the garment and stops it stretching. So you think about the type of stitches you're using, how much stretch they've got, and your construction. And you can see all of these things start to build. I think this might have to be a blog post where I list it out because it's quite hard to hold it in my head. But all of these things start to build a picture of what your garment is likely to do. One of the other questions I had was about hats, and hats always stretching out of shape. It's the same issue with fabric properties. It's stretch versus elasticity with hats, and the same for a cuff, for example, or anything that you want to kind of cling. So a common way to finish a hat is with like a ribbed brim, and I've got a very long video which shows you 11 types of crochet ribbing, and in that video I talk in detail about this, because in a hat where you want to have negative ease, so the hat wants to be smaller than your head, you want a stitch combination that will stretch to fit your head but has some elasticity, so when you take it off it goes back to its original size. And that is kind of one of the real keys. It's that elasticity. So I'd say that stretch and elasticity is different because the elasticity bounces back. The stretch will just, well, you can have something that's stretchy and elastic, but if it's just got the stretch and doesn't bounce back, that's not as helpful. So sizing, stitch pattern, fibre. Different fibres react differently to stretch. You've got something like cotton, which doesn't stretch the fibre itself, but your stitch pattern can still stretch. So there's a difference between the stretch in the fibre and the stretch in the stitch pattern. So they're two separate things. I find wool, so merino, for example, has quite a lot more stretch than acrylic, for example. Whereas acrylic has a little bit, maybe a bit more than cotton, but again, depends on the blend. So really examine your swatch. You kind of got to trash it to know how it's going to hold up. And I think you'd much rather do that and go, do you know what, this fibre isn't right for this size garment, or, if I make this sweater 2 inches shorter, then by the time I've worn it a few times, it will be the length I want. My friend used to always buy jeans a size smaller because she knew that after an hour or two wearing them, they'd be more comfortable and the bigger ones would be too big. It's the same principle. The other thing I would say, so those are the slightly intangible issues. I mean, some of them you can do more about, but the one thing that you can really do about is to pause and keep checking. And you know when you're wanting to get on with a project, you're kind of crocheting, and you just want to keep going. I do, especially if I'm on a roll with it. But stop and check it if your gauge has increased by 20%. Because if it has, and you're checking, when you've got this far down instead of this far down, then you can maybe do something about it. So you can either take rows out, or you can frog a few rows and tighten back up again. There are so many things that affect your gauge. So I've got a whole series of blog posts all about gauge. So if you're new to it, I really encourage you to look at those, and I'll link them all in the description. But even the way you sit, the location, if you're watching something stressful on TV, if you're in a bad mood, you might be, really yanking at your yarn. If the ball of your yarn is wound really tight. I mentioned about that previous, the Fluff It sweater that I'm working on. You've got to really make sure you've not got too much tension on your yarn, because that'll tighten the gauge right up. So making sure, or trying to make sure, that those things you can control are as consistent as possible is one way to kind of give yourself a chance. The other thing that happens is, often when you start a project and you're really focusing on, maybe it's a new stitch pattern or something like that, you kind of are paying a lot of attention, and it's kind of, your gauge is quite tight. And then as you start to relax and get into the stitch pattern, it loosens up. That's Actually, I sometimes find the opposite with me, because if I'm trying to keep a relaxed gauge, I'm always trying too hard to keep my gauge relaxed, and then I get quicker and I actually can tighten up my gauge. I can also loosen it, so I can go either way, which just highlights the point to just keep checking, like pause and check where you're at, because if you do that, you can correct it if you need to. And also, this is why it's really important to have a gauge pre-blocking and post-blocking, because if you're making a garment and you know what you want the finished you know what you want the finished gauge to be, but you're not going to see that until you finished it and blocked it. So knowing what your gauge was before you blocked it to get the gauge you wanted after blocking is really helpful in those circumstances. So say, after blocking you want 18 stitches, but before you've blocked it, you've got 16 stitches. Then if you're working it and you've got 15 stitches, you're just like, is this right? Is this wrong? I got that backwards, because you generally have more stitches before you block it because you're stretching out. So let's say you want 16, you've got 18 pre-block, so you block it out to 16. You need to be working on 18 when you're making. So I think that's, I'm just looking at my notes and I've called those two different eases garment ease versus design ease, but I'm not sure that's right. I'll just link to the video. That is the kind of layers that you need to think about. And I know that's a lot, and I feel like I need to list them out. I do talk about a lot of these issues in my gauge swatch blog post, so please do watch that if this is something that you struggle with. There might be something I haven't thought of, but honestly, pausing and checking is the way to go. And I'm going to pause and check my notes that I haven't missed anything. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to discuss. So with that in mind, I've gone way over time again. I hope that's useful. If you've got any questions specific about gauge, please put them in the comments. If you've got any general questions that you want me to address on these podcasts, put them either in the comments or in the Ask Me Anything. It's just a Google form, so it's totally confidential. And the only other thing I'd say, don't get disheartened. We've all made really ugly things that we're like disappointed in, and 9 times out of 10 you can reuse the yarn for something else. Don't be afraid to frog it. It's not a failure, it's a learning. I know it's such a cliche now, isn't it? But it's really true, even though it feels like a failure in the moment. But failure is actually really important. So it's the best way to learn. If you never fail, you don't know how to fail. And it's a really good lesson to learn. So with that little bit of philosophy, I'm going to leave you to go and think about gauge. So that's the kind of excitement you get here. Okay, thank you for watching, and see you in a couple of weeks. Bye.